Good morning. My name is David Lucchino, and I'm the CEO of Frequency Therapeutics. I want to thank you for joining us today, and I very much appreciate the opportunity to share an update on our company and pipeline progress over the past year. Our focus today will largely be on FX-322, our lead program for sensorineural hearing loss. Specifically, we will discuss the upcoming Q1 readout of our Phase 2b study and the market opportunity it represents. As you will see, FX-322-208 study is the most rigorous trial in the hearing loss field to date and is specifically powered to demonstrate clear, pre-specified efficacy. Today, we will provide insights regarding the study and the market opportunity based on the patient population enrolled. We'll also be joined by two key opinion leaders who will share perspective on the 208 study endpoints, the critical need to address speech perception deficits for individuals with hearing loss, and the opportunity this intervention could provide physicians who currently have no medicines to restore hearing. I will also provide brief updates on two other pipeline assets, our second program to restore hearing and our remyelination program in multiple sclerosis. Today, we'll be making forward-looking statements. I would refer you to our recent SEC filings for additional information. At Frequency, we are developing a new category of regenerative medicine using small molecules to activate a person's innate regenerative potential. We call our approach progenitor cell activation, or PCA. The approach is built on technology from the labs of Bob Langer at MIT and Jeff Karp at Harvard Medical School, where they identified the signals and pathways necessary to activate regenerative cells already in place within the body. With PCA, we believe we may be able to repair damaged tissue and even reverse disease for a range of degenerative conditions. In hearing, our focus is on regenerating cells in the cochlea. Many species, like birds or reptiles, can regenerate damaged cells in the ear and restore hearing naturally. In humans, that cellular machinery is in place. It just needs to be turned on. Our lead drug candidate, FX-322, is designed to stimulate cochlear progenitor cells and repair damage to the cochlea. In our first human study, we not only established a favorable safety profile for FX-322, but also observed the first hearing restoration signal. In a double-blinded, placebo-controlled study, more than 30% of subjects treated with FX-322 showed clinically meaningful improvements in a measure of speech perception, with some subjects even doubling their word recognition scores. The results of the study were published in Otology and Neurotology in 2021, and as you can see on this slide, these results were subsequently replicated in a second clinical study. Later, when we pooled data from our other FX-322 trials, we continued to see a clear hearing signal. Moreover, we were able to hone in on the specific etiologies and severities where we have seen FX-322 have the greatest effect. The Phase 2b study completed enrollment in October and is powered to show both statistical and clinical significance against a speech perception endpoint that is agreed upon with the FDA. Let me be clear, we are no longer looking for just a hearing improvement signal. The 208 study is designed to definitively demonstrate efficacy. As I mentioned, there are no therapies that exist today to treat the underlying cause of sensorineural hearing loss. If successful, FX-322 may offer a potential treatment for one of the largest causes of disability across the globe. And our speech perception endpoint brings focus to a key unmet need for individuals with hearing loss, the ability to understand speech more clearly. And we're not stopping with FX-322. Our second hearing restoration program, FX-345, is also designed to reactivate progenitor cells to induce repair of the cochlea. FX-345 includes a more potent GSK3 inhibitor, a new chemical entity that may enable targeted drug exposure further into the cochlea. We believe this will enable us to assess whether our approach can have an even greater patient impact or help a broader hearing loss population. FX-345 will soon enter the clinic, and we will have data from that program in the second half of 2023. Finally, I want to mention our remyelination program in multiple sclerosis. As you know, current MS therapies can be effective at easing symptoms and slowing the progression of disease. But no current therapy restores the myelin that, when damaged, causes the debilitating symptoms of MS. A treatment to repair myelin would address the critical unmet need for patients. Our approach again is to activate natural progenitors, in this case, the precursor cells that create myelin. We have identified a novel target that is highly effective at driving remyelination and has outperformed previously reported remyelination candidates in rigorous in vivo models. We are not aware of any other remyelinating agent with this magnitude of effect, a point validated by many of the KOLs we met with at ECTRIMS in October. With the development candidate in hand, the program is currently in IND-enabling studies, and we are looking forward to meeting with regulatory agencies in the second half of 2023 to discuss advancing the program to the clinic. 2023 will be a very busy year for our remyelination efforts, and we look forward to providing more details on this program in the months ahead. Today, you will hear from my colleague Kevin Frank, who will discuss the unmet need and market opportunity for FX-322 and its commercial path. Carl LaBelle, our Chief Development Officer, will take you through details of our FX-322 Phase 2B study and show you why we believe our approach will result in a clear readout in Q1 2023. We're also honored to be joined by two distinguished KOLs. Dr. Chris Runge from the Medical College of Wisconsin will discuss the critical importance of speech perception, the real-world impact of such deficits on hearing and overall health, and the clinical measures used to evaluate hearing. And Anthony Mikulek, professor of otology neurotology at St. Louis University, will discuss how new medicines for hearing may be integrated into clinical practice and the existing infrastructure to support the procedure. We believe our work to develop FX-322 has continued to advance the emerging field of hearing restoration. FX-322 remains the first therapeutic to show statistically significant and clinically meaningful improvements in hearing function for individuals with acquired and stable sensorineural hearing loss. Some subjects in our study showed these improvements were sustained for nearly 2 years, suggesting a potential disease-modifying benefit. And FX-322 has shown a favorable safety profile with no treatment-related serious adverse events in more than 200 subjects in our studies. As pioneers in the space, our work in the clinic has been essential to enabling us to design a potentially pivotal study to demonstrate efficacy. We now look forward to data in the months ahead. Thank you all for your time today and your interest in Frequency. I will now hand it to my colleagues Kevin Frank and Carl LaBelle for their remarks.
Hi, I'm Kevin Frank. I lead our pre-commercial efforts here at Frequency, having joined the firm from Mass Eye, Harvard Medical School, where I led audiology. I've had a diverse career in the hearing field, working in large academic clinics, as well as established and startup hearing device companies. But having learned of Frequency's progress in hearing therapeutics, I knew this could be a unique opportunity to advance the field and address critical unmet needs in hearing health through hearing restoration efforts. Today, we are excited to share with you an overview of our hearing restoration work and updates on our FX-322 program, which will have a clinical readout next quarter. Like you, we are looking forward to this key milestone, and with positive data, we plan to continue to advance our hearing restoration program to pivotal studies. With no comparators or approved drugs for hearing, we want to ensure we provide for you as clear a picture as possible for how to think about the elements of a successful readout, the basis for clinical and statistical significance, the relevance of the clinical endpoints to patients, and the potential uptake for a pharmaceutical intervention for acquired sensorineural hearing loss. Acquired sensorineural hearing loss is the loss of hearing function that can occur at any time in one's life, a result of environmental exposures such as noise or viruses, trauma, age, and associated comorbidities, and it can occur idiopathically, which means for unknown reasons. It's important to understand that it is distinct from congenital hearing loss, which is present at birth, or other genetic forms that can lead to hearing loss later in life. This type of hearing loss is the most common form, impacting approximately 40 million people in the US and more than 1 billion people globally. Today, people with acquired sensorineural hearing loss are either treated with a hearing aid or, for more severe to profound forms, a cochlear implant. But few of those who need devices get them. The 20% or so with hearing aids generally benefit from amplification, as do severe patients who receive cochlear implants, but neither address the underlying biological issues and thus restore hearing. At an FDA-hosted patient-focused drug development meeting held last year and sponsored by the Hearing Loss Association of America, patients were clear that speech clarity, or the ability to understand speech, remained a critical challenge even for those with hearing devices. I'd like to illustrate for you the discrepancy between audibility and speech perception as it appears in hearing exams. I'll refer to this discrepancy as the resolution gap. The x-axis on this chart represents volume, and the y-axis, percent of words understood. The red line represents a patient's speech perception. Based on audibility, it demonstrates scores if the ear's only problem was an inability to hear the words. As the volume goes up, the score goes from 0 to near perfect. But as you can see here, the right ear hears better than the left in blue. Now, let's look at this patient's actual speech perception scores. As you can see, both ears' actual speech perception scores are much lower. The difference between the detection score and the actual score is the resolution gap caused by a lack of clarity. This gap occurs in all patients with sensorineural hearing loss and varies in individual patients. The right ear's resolution gap is around 25%, and the left ear's gap is even bigger at around 80%. I show you all this because there's a general assumption that greater volume should lead to greater clarity. But as you can see, that's just not the case. It's our hope that FX-322 can close this gap and meet this critical unmet need for individuals with hearing loss. With that background, I'd like to introduce Carl Labelle, our Chief Development Officer, who will share with you updates from our FX-322 clinical trials and our plans to advance our hearing restoration efforts.
Thank you, Kevin, and hello, everyone. My name is Carl Labelle, and I head development at Frequency. This past year, we've worked to enroll a large, double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical trial of FX-322 in patients with acquired sensorineural hearing loss, referred to as the 208 study. This clinical trial was designed to demonstrate efficacy based on an FDA-aligned primary endpoint of speech perception. This means that an effective treatment will allow patients to hear speech more clearly, enhancing communication and their ability to understand conversation. While hearing devices primarily aim to provide amplification, a therapeutic like FX-322 may be disease-modifying by enhancing speech comprehension. Let's briefly discuss FX-322 and the evidence that we have gathered to demonstrate that it will be able to gain access to the cochlea. FX-322 is delivered locally to the middle ear by an intratympanic injection, an office-based procedure that is commonly performed by otolaryngologists. After injection, FX-322 diffuses through the round window membrane, allowing it to gain access to the inner ear, where the progenitor cells and sensory hair cells are located. We have established in numerous preclinical models, as well as in patients that were scheduled to receive cochlear implants, that FX-322 gains access to the cochlea at estimated therapeutic levels. We published this work in 2021 in one of the field's leading peer-reviewed journals, Otology and Neurotology. Furthermore, we demonstrated proof of biology with FX-322 in a mouse model of noise exposure, work that was published in the Journal of the American Academy of Audiology earlier this year. All this essential work was supportive of advancing FX-322 into human trials. In 2018, we started our first U.S. trial in patients with acquired sensorineural hearing loss that we refer to as the 201 study. The 201 study was double-blind, placebo-controlled, a design that enabled us to establish a favorable safety profile for FX-322, as well as to observe a hearing restoration signal, the first time this has been demonstrated in any hearing study. We observed that more than 30% of subjects treated with FX-322 showed clinically meaningful improvements in a measure of speech perception, illustrated by the orange bubbles that exceed the minimal threshold for for a clinical benefit. We followed this trial with another probing study, the 111 study, which was an open-label trial evaluating different administration conditions, and we observed once again a greater than 30% response in speech perception improvements. When we pool the results of these two studies, you can see the increased number of orange bubbles that exceed the threshold for clinical benefit, while no placebo or untreated ears change. After these early studies, we've run several additional trials, the learnings of which have been applied to the design of the 208 trial, and we designed the study to provide us with a clear answer as to whether FX-322 can be a drug. As one advances in drug development, it's critical to reduce complexities in the clinical program. I believe that Frequency has worked carefully and methodically to achieve this goal, critically evaluating the data that have been derived from 5 clinical trials that evaluated FX-322 across the etiologies and severities of sensorineural hearing loss. Based on this collective experience, we've derived 3 key learnings from the totality of the FX-322 clinical program. First, there are a series of key study protocol features that bring rigor to the study in several ways. We use standardized measures of speech perception in quiet and noisy backgrounds. We mask certain protocol criteria to the sites. We require that patients must establish a stable baseline performance in all measures of auditory function to get randomized. And lastly, we monitor all auditory sessions as a means of standardizing testing methods across 28 clinical trial sites in order to minimize variability in these test measures. Secondly, by performing a pooled data analysis of our single-dose trials, we now have a solid understanding of patient response to FX-322, which generally occurs in either sudden or noise-induced sensorineural hearing loss patients that are characterized in the moderate to severe range. This has enabled us to enrich the 208 study population with these specific audiology profiles. Lastly, FX-322 appears to exhibit a favorable safety profile since it is locally delivered. There have been no treatment-related serious adverse events in more than 200 patients that have been dosed with FX-322. Importantly, the adverse events are typically associated with the injection procedure itself. This favorable safety profile is critical for potentially being the first hearing restoration therapeutic. Taken together, we are conducting the most rigorous trial in the hearing loss field to date, and we look forward to the clear data readout in the first quarter of next year. Last year, we held a Type C meeting with FDA in order to share our pooled data, to present to them the 208 design, and to propose a primary endpoint on which we gained alignment, therefore enabling us to pre-specify the analysis for this endpoint. We also shared with them work on our proprietary patient-reported outcome measure, Radial, designed by patients with acquired sensorineural hearing loss. We are pleased with and continue interactions with FDA on the FX-322 program, which also benefits from fast-track status. So what does success look like? From the analysis of our clinical trials, our data suggested that 25% of patients treated with FX-322 exhibited statistically significant improvements in a measure of speech perception 3 months after treatment, while 0% of placebo-treated patients responded. We chose to assume a margin of difference between the FX-322 and placebo-treated patients of 20%. For us to detect a 20% difference, our analysis indicated that we needed a sample size of 112, assuming 80% power with a significance level of 0.05. We also assumed a 10% loss to follow-up, and therefore increased our sample size to 124 patients. As you know, we are pleased to share recently that we completed study enrollment with 142 subjects, which was within 15% of our target. Therefore, we consider success will be that FX-322 is statistically significant compared to placebo on the proportion of patients exceeding the 95% confidence interval on a speech perception test, which is a responder analysis. While all parties remain blinded to the study, we can share some insights regarding the conduct of the 208 trial. To start, approximately 11,000 patients were pre-screened for participation in the study, either through our digital advertising campaign or from sites recruiting from their respective databases. The fact that 11,000 patients expressed interest in participating was remarkable, suggesting that people with hearing loss are eager to look for new treatment alternatives. The strict inclusion and exclusion protocol criteria, some of which were masked to the sites, resulted in approximately 4% of patients attending the first study visit. We can share with you that 417 patients attended an initial study visit. After all patients completed the 30-day lead-in phase, we randomized 142 patients. Therefore, we observed a screen failure rate of approximately 65%, slightly higher than we had experienced in previous trials. We have carefully evaluated the reasons why subjects failed to qualify, which were exactly in line with study design features discussed earlier. Subjects generally fail to qualify for reasons that were masked to the sites, which we think enhances the objectivity of the recruitment and randomization process. This slide shows you a demographic of key entry criteria, specifically etiology and severity. The greater proportion of patients were in the moderately severe category. Furthermore, the roughly 70-30 split between sudden and noise-induced sensorineural hearing loss patients is in line with our previous trials, and we are pleased with the balance across these key criteria. As stated earlier, the recruitment process has been successful in randomizing patients with the characteristics that appear most responsive to FX-322 treatment using a pre-specified primary endpoint. We are also pleased to say that as of today, the patient retention rate is better than 99%, outstanding performance for a study that has been running through COVID and other natural disasters. Our central IRB indicated that the biopharma industry generally sees an 80% retention rate, so our experience on the 208 study tracks favorably to industry standards. The top-line data we share in Q1 will include a quantitative comparison of treatment with either FX-322 or placebo on the primary endpoint of speech perception. We may also share our analyses of certain secondary and exploratory endpoints. In parallel with these activities, we will continue to work with our global partner Astellas to review our data and map the course to global approval for FX-322. We emphasize that we are no longer looking for a hearing improvement signal, but the 208 study is designed to definitively demonstrate efficacy. Assuming a positive readout, we will then request an end-of-phase 2 meeting with FDA as well as apply for breakthrough designation. I want to personally thank our investigators, audiologists, our vendors, and most importantly, the patients who have agreed to participate in this important step in hearing research. With that, I'll turn the program over to Dr. Chris Runge.
Great, thank you so much. Yes, I'm Christina Runge. I'm professor of otolaryngology and communication sciences and director of the cochlear implant program at the Medical College of Wisconsin in Milwaukee. And I have been an audiologist, an auditory scientist for over 25 years, and a lot of experience with all kinds of causes of hearing loss and treatments for hearing loss and what we can do about it and how we can best help our patients with hearing loss. So what do our patients say when they come into the clinic? When they first notice they're having difficulty hearing, they will come in and say, I can hear, but I can't understand. So immediately they will be put into the sound booth. We measure their hearing and think, okay, they probably are having trouble understanding high-pitched or high-frequency sounds. They're doing pretty well understanding low-pitched sounds. That's why they say they can hear, but they're missing some information. So we measure the audibility and think, okay, now we know and we can tell the patient, well, you're having some difficulty detecting high-pitched sounds, so you're missing some speech information. But that's not what's really troubling them. What's really bothering them is exactly what they said when they first came in, that they can't understand. They want to know how they can communicate again. They want to be able to restore that ability to relate to others and participate in the human experience. Here, I'd like to show you an example of an audiogram where we measure audibility of a patient who comes into our clinic. So here is a graph, and you can see we plot from low pitches to high pitches and from soft sounds to loud sounds. For this patient, you can see that their audibility is actually quite good in the low pitches, but then it slopes to where they have very poor audibility in the higher pitches. And this shaded area here represents the different sounds of speech. And here you can see that they're actually able to hear some of the speech sounds, but in this area, they're actually missing quite a bit of speech information. And this goes along with what they claim to say, that they have trouble understanding speech. So they can hear speech, but they can't understand it. And this can be very, very debilitating to people when they're missing this speech information. So I'll play a simulation here of what it sounds like to hear a few sentences, first off with normal hearing.
When the sunlight strikes raindrops in the air, they act as a prism and form a rainbow. The rainbow is a division of white light into many beautiful colors.
And now I'll play those same sentences, but for someone who has this level of hearing loss and is missing this speech information.
When the sunlight strikes raindrops in the air, they act as a prism and form a rainbow. The rainbow is a division of white light into many beautiful colors.
So you can tell it sounds more muffled and maybe even missing some of the speech information. But because it's in quiet, we might do okay knowing the context, maybe being familiar with the speaker. But even some people with this level of hearing loss, even in quiet, can have a lot of difficulty understanding speech. And so it's very dependent. Different patients have different experiences, even when they have this same amount of hearing loss. So let me play this example again, but this time in background noise.
When the sunlight strikes raindrops in the air, they act as a prism and form a rainbow. A rainbow is a division of white light into many beautiful colors.
So with that example, it becomes very, very clear how debilitating even this moderate amount of high frequency hearing loss can be. This can cause a lot of difficulty in their life. It can lead to isolation, anxiety, and depression. And so this becomes incredibly impactful for us to be able to do something about this and restore this clarity of hearing for speech perception. So again, even with this same audibility, people have different experiences, but we want people to be able to understand speech and engage with their lives again. And so we measure speech perception as well. We just talked about audibility, but then again, there's variability in how people experience that same hearing loss. So we can control very well measuring speech perception. We have validated lists. We have ways of calibrating and knowing exactly what someone is hearing when we're testing them. And in doing that, then we can understand more about what they're experiencing in their day-to-day life. We can measure these from clinic to clinic, and we know that it's standardized, and we can compare no matter where someone's being tested or how this is being approached. We've got it calibrated, and it's very standardized. And so we can calculate their performance, for example, in percent of words correct, in order to know, have a good idea of what this patient is experiencing. We can use these to measure effectiveness of different interventions. In our field, we've used amplification, we have cochlear implants, and then now we have pharmacotherapy treatment. And so what we're looking for is clinically meaningful change. So when we make these measurements, again, using these very standardized tests, we can tell based on test, retest experiments that we have done in the past, that we know whether or not a treatment is effective. And you can see on the right, as an example, we see here on the x-axis a baseline performance in percent correct, from 0% correct to 100% correct. And then this is following pharmacotherapy treatment. So you can see here 0% correct to 100% correct. And this dotted line in the middle shows equivalent performance before and after the therapy. And so what we know from these standardized tests, and for this in particular, with this dotted line here, we know that anything above this in this area here on the day 90 performance post-treatment, that anything on this falling outside of this is a significant improvement for these patients. So each of these symbols is a different patient. And so what we can see is that there are really significant improvements on these very validated standardized tests. And so it's very reliable that we have patients experiencing effectiveness and improved speech perception with this therapy. And this is something we've never seen before in our field, and is incredibly exciting that we're able to restore people's ability to understand speech and clarity of speech with a treatment. And so this leads me to the exciting new frontier, the holy grail, if you will, of our field in audiology and hearing sciences. The ability to provide clarity of speech and not just make it louder or provide some other way, for example, electrical hearing that people need to get used to, but to provide clarity of speech with someone's own ear, and to be able to treat and restore function of the cochlea is incredibly exciting. So we're used to, in our field in audiology, treating a degenerating system, but this, now we get a chance to treat a regenerating system. So we're regenerating things, and we can provide all different types of tools to bring together to optimize hearing for individual patients. So once we can provide clarity of speech, we have so many things we can bring with that to optimize hearing for any individual person. Because again, as I mentioned before, even with the same audibility, the same hearing loss, people have very different experiences in their speech perception and their ability to communicate with others. So now we're able to really, truly bring that to the fore and help our patients engage fully in their lives. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks to the team at Frequency for having me. This is an area I'm very passionate about. I've been involved in inner ear drug delivery for about 20 years. My name's Tony Mikulek, and I'm currently a professor of otology and neurotology at St. Louis University, which means I take care of patients with hearing loss. The current role of the ENT or otolaryngologist is one where, with sensorineural hearing loss, the patient will often come to the general ENT or otolaryngologist seeking treatment, but unfortunately, most ENTs can't provide any treatment for that hearing loss besides hearing aids, because there really isn't any other treatment, and hearing aids are the only available treatment. And unfortunately, they're expensive, they're cumbersome, there's cosmetic concerns with them. And perhaps most importantly, hearing aids don't actually treat the underlying disease. They don't prevent the progression of hearing loss. And the physician role typically ends with a referral to an audiologist. The audiologist is the person who does the hearing testing and then also fits the hearing aids, and then usually follows up with the patient down the road. The treatment path for severe sensorineural hearing loss when hearing aids aren't enough is cochlear implantation. So the way to think about this is there's two parts to hearing. One is being able to hear the sound. The other one is being able to tell words apart, cat from hat from bat. Hearing aids can make things louder, but they don't help you tell words apart. And so when word discrimination is an issue and hearing aids aren't doing the trick anymore, then the next step is cochlear implantation. So at that point, the audiologist and or the general ENT would refer the patient to someone like me, who is a cochlear implant surgeon, and then that patient leaves that practice and comes to us. So with cochlear implantation, it's a lifelong commitment. So the sound is much more electronic with cochlear implants. And there's also an irreversible loss of the residual hearing with cochlear implantation. So the ear that's implanted is completely dependent on the device. It takes quite a few visits with the audiologist to get this tuned, and it takes patients about a year or so to get to where they're going in terms of the speech understanding with the cochlear implant. Needless to say, patients would very much prefer a non-surgical alternative that preserves or improves their hearing. Most ENT physicians would prefer this as well, especially if they can perform the treatment themselves as opposed to having to send the patient on to a cochlear implant center. Sensorineural hearing loss is a small subset of sensorineural hearing loss where, as the name implies, the hearing was lost suddenly. Most of these cases present to primary care doctors or urgent care centers and are diagnosed as quote-unquote ear infections or eustachian tube dysfunction. Once they are finally treated appropriately, the treatments have an uncertain benefit. It's a Cochrane review I participated in recently that looked at this, but briefly, the treatment options currently are steroids by mouth, which have significant side effects, intratympanic steroids, where they're injected directly into the ear, and hyperbaric oxygen. Unfortunately, none of them work reliably. If the hearing is not recovered to the point where a hearing aid can be used in the ear where there was a sudden sensorineural hearing loss, then the next step is one of several options. One option is a cross hearing aid where sound is routed from the bad ear to the good ear, but then the patient has to wear something on both ears. There's a Baha implant, which is literally a little screw that goes in the skull behind the ear, and it routes the sound through the bones of the head to the other side. And then there's a cochlear implant, which provides stimulation to the ear where the hearing loss is, but it's a much more electronic sound, as we've talked about. And that's really investment in time on the part of the patient to get that to work. So needless to say, more treatments are needed in the armamentarium. And ideally, we'd like to be able to recover the hearing loss that's been lost instead of just trying to work around it. Most general ENTs are very familiar with intratympanic injections. There's minimal equipment needed, just need a syringe, a 25-gauge spinal needle, and a microscope. And those are the kinds of things that are available in just about every general ENT office. It's nice that it has its own billing code or CPT code that's been around for quite some time. It's a very safe procedure. The biggest risk is a hole in the eardrum, which is less than 1% and usually is easily fixed, even if that were to occur. So this familiarity really opens the window to a broad adaptation of other IT treatments that come down the pike. Let's think about what would be needed for adoption of a cochlear regenerative. Certainly, cochlear regenerative needs to be something that's safe, it needs to be easy to administer, and it needs to be effective. And by effective, what we mean is an improvement in speech perception, and very small improvements here can be quite meaningful. So 5 to 10% can be a meaningful improvement. The way I like to explain this to patients is getting an 85% on your quiz or test in school is certainly not as good as getting a 95%, and most people would prefer the 95%. So as we think about what do we want in the future in terms of how would we like to treat patients with sensorineural hearing loss, restorative therapeutics are clearly where we want to go. I think the coming age in our field is going to be one of inner ear therapeutics, of bringing back the hearing that's been lost instead of working around it. The nice thing about these therapeutics is they're simple procedures. And there's an old surgical saying that the road to happiness is paved with simple procedures, and this is certainly one of them. And as someone who's been involved in this field for 20 years and have seen the general ENTs and other people come on board, I'm really excited that the field is moving in this direction. And I think it's going to be fairly straightforward to get fairly broad adoption of a restorative therapeutic that comes to market. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you today, and thank you very much.
You just heard from Dr. Anthony Mikulek, who spoke about the opportunity for physicians to be able to treat patients with hearing loss. That clinical need is very real and is reflected in numerous reports from national and international health organizations focused on the severe impact hearing loss can have on health and society. The number of people with hearing loss is staggering. The World Health Organization recently reported the number of people with hearing loss globally in the billions, with global societal costs estimated at close to $1 trillion. Leading medical journals highlight that people with hearing loss have increased risk of other debilitating health concerns, such as dementia and depression, and research is underway to determine if addressing these concerns with hearing intervention may reduce them. The common reality is that in general, people are slow to recognize their sensorineural hearing loss, and only a small fraction of those that do act. This is in part because hearing devices are the only clinical interventions available and do not address the underlying problem of the loss of cochlear resolution, or the ability to understand clearly, as well as other key barriers such as cost and stigma. Hearing aids are helpful and amplifying inaudible sounds, but are limited in their ability to help improve the clarity of what's heard, especially in noise. Cochlear implants are life-changing for people with the most severe sensory hearing loss, but they force the patient to give up on the biological function they replace. The fundamentals of these medical devices haven't changed. And while the over-the-counter hearing aids will hopefully address access by lowering cost, it does nothing to change these underlying technical hurdles. Clinicians and patients who have been seeking innovation and new approaches are calling for cochlear regeneration explicitly to address this unmet need. Today, I want to discuss the opportunity that I see for innovation in cochlear restoration and the potential market that can be created with a pharmaceutical intervention for hearing loss. Our most recent Phase 2b study of FX-322 had a trial inclusion criterion that represent between 7 and 10 million of the approximately 40 million adults with sensorineural hearing loss in the United States. As we've shared, these patients have moderate to severe hearing loss with histories consistent with sudden idiopathic and noise-induced hearing loss. While the incidence is relatively lower, there are more patients in the trial with sudden hearing loss because they're very motivated to seek treatment. If they reached the ENT physician close enough to the onset of the hearing loss, they likely would have tried steroid treatment. If the hearing loss did not recover, they are already engaged with a channel who could provide FX-322. The much greater number of patients with noise-induced hearing loss take a long time to try hearing aids and are motivated to try something different because while hearing aids make things louder, they can't make them clearer due to the cochlear damage we hope to address. There are likely even more than 7 to 10 million people we could treat, but the point is that these patients are motivated to seek treatment from a channel able to help them. There are several tailwinds that help us chart a course to commercialization, giving our small molecule approach, an established ENT channel, a potential for reimbursement, all of which distinguish us from the current standard of care. The FX-322 small molecules have been injected into the ears of over 200 patients. To date, there have been no drug-related serious adverse events. In the simple office-based procedure, the drug candidate is placed on the round window of the cochlea through an intratympanic injection and diffuses into the cochlea to temporarily provide signals to regenerate new cells. This is fundamentally different from the invasive and complex surgical interventions of delivery of cell and gene therapies. Also, our approach aims to treat a huge market of millions of individuals with the procedure safety and pricing flexibility that small molecule provides, as opposed to the small set of individuals that could be gene therapy candidates, an intervention likely much more complicated and expensive than today's bilateral cochlear implant standard of care. We've been working to understand how our new therapeutic will exist in the future market. An existing channel is in place that will treat patients with FX-322, and as you heard from Dr. Mikulek, in the acute phase of sudden idiopathic hearing loss, an ENT physician or otologist may inject off-label steroids into the middle ear. ENT clinics do intratympanic injections routinely and therefore are already set up for FX-322. There are approximately 10,000 such specialty ear physicians, most of whom have employment or referral relationships with audiologists. There are slightly more audiologists than ENTs, and they are key to the story because they are licensed to measure and interpret data that will determine candidacy and measure the success of this treatment. Audiologists provide hearing aids to people with sensory hearing loss, but as you heard Dr. Runge say, we believe there is a true expansion opportunity to support their patients. They may be looking for alternate or adjuvant interventions such as FX-322. While a new therapeutic option for hearing loss will be revolutionary, it will not require large changes to clinical practice. The American Academy of Otolaryngology Head and Neck Surgery would welcome the ability of member physicians to treat more patients. The audiology organizations support the expanded role their members would have in determining candidacy for and measuring the outcomes of therapeutic treatment, in addition to improved hearing aid outcomes. As mentioned, members of the Hearing Loss Association of America have been asking for a solution to the problem of understanding what's heard. We're working closely with these organizations and support their issues and priorities. Hearing intervention services are routinely covered by public and private payers. ENT surgeons are reimbursed to treat conductive hearing loss, putting tubes in children, replacing middle ear bones, for example. They are reimbursed for implanting hearing devices for severe to profound hearing loss and unilateral deafness, each of which costs tens of thousands of dollars, both at the time of surgery and with every processor replacement. As mentioned, the CPT code for intratympanic injection is already reimbursed in other forms of treatment. Though today there is limited coverage of hearing aids and no Medicare coverage for hearing aids, the statutory exclusion of hearing aids from Medicare is not relevant in the context of what we're doing. Given the combination of demonstrated value provided by intervening with hearing loss and the pricing flexibility small molecule and existing administration procedures provide, we feel confident we can generate significant value while also negotiating a price and reimbursement to make this intervention available and beneficial to patients, providers, and payers. I'm so excited to see the results of the 208 trial, as this could be a step toward providing a transformational new medicine for hearing loss. The market research we've done with patients and providers so far has been encouraging. We've gained insights into how patients and providers feel about the value proposition based on our clinical results so far. We're already planning how we'll approach the market segments with this new drug. My career has focused on new approaches to supporting people with hearing loss in the clinical, academic, device, and nonprofit sectors. FX-322 as a potential cochlear regenerator is the most long-awaited and exciting prospect thus far, and is an advance that has been discussed and awaited by the field for decades. Now, David will provide concluding remarks.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you to all of today's presenters for providing additional clarity and insight as we look towards our Phase 2b study readout. If you take away three things from today, the first is that we have a unique opportunity to advance the first restorative treatment for acquired sensorineural hearing loss. The second is that we are focused on a key unmet need for individuals with hearing loss, the need for greater speech perception. And third, we have clear, predefined endpoints. 2023 is a year of critical milestones for our company, starting with the FX-322 Phase 2b study readout in Q1, where success will be based on both statistically and clinically meaningful outcomes. This will be followed by data in the second half of 2023 for our safety study of FX-345, our second hearing restoration candidate. Late next year, we will also submit to regulators our clinical plan for our novel and highly promising remyelination program in multiple sclerosis, also in the second half of 2023. This is a program with a target we believe no one else has explored, and with preclinical results that have surpassed all other known programs. Today, there are no medicines to restore hearing or replace myelin damage by MS. We're on the cusp of showing the true potential of our novel approach to regenerative medicine with pipeline programs that have potential to create multi-billion-dollar markets. We have the resources to achieve the next set of catalysts across all of our programs, and we anticipate that with success that our partner Astellas will look to activate FX-322 studies in their territories, triggering substantial milestone payments. We very much appreciate your interest in Frequency and look forward to answering your questions. Operator, please open the lines.
As a reminder, to ask a question, you will need to press star 11 on your telephone. Please limit questions to 2, please. Please stand by while we compile the Q&A roster. Our first question comes from Phil Nadeau with Cowen. Your line is open.
Good morning.
Hi,
Thanks
Phil.
for the overview. It's very helpful. I guess the first question on the endpoint that's being examined in the Phase 2b study, we appreciate you want to keep some of the details under wraps to prevent any sort of manipulation in the trial conduct. But are there other details are there any details that you can give us on the endpoint in terms of whether it's words and noise, words and quiet, or any other information?
Phil, good morning. Great question. I'm going to turn that over to Carl and let him take that.
Yeah, hey Phil. As you know, we've masked the protocol on a number of topics to the sites. They know that they're doing a series of speech perception measures. We do them both in quiet as well as in noise backgrounds. That's as much information as we can give right now to again, protect the integrity of that endpoint.
Perfect. That's helpful. And then second question's on the clinical meaningfulness of improvements. I think in the prepared remarks, it was mentioned that 5 to 10% improvement could be considered meaningful. I'm curious to hear a bit more from the clinicians on exactly what is a meaningful improvement. Is words in quiet sufficient to be clinically, or for a patient to have an improved quality of life? Does perception have to improve in a noisy background as well? Just more details on what patients would find clinically meaningful in terms of an improvement.
Dr. Runge, do you want to kick off, and then Dr. Mikulik can also chime in?
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you for the opportunity. This is a perfect question, and this is also why we measure both in speech perception in quiet and in background noise. They tell us something different. And we can sort of relate the two of them together because people are in all these different sorts of scenarios in their daily life. So each one tells us something a little different. It's difficult when we talk about like a certain percentage giving us the information and describing the percentage of improvement to describe how someone's going to do in the real world. However, we can extrapolate. For example, 5 to 10% improvement in speech perception and quiet, we can extrapolate about what that might mean to a patient in the real world. As Dr. Mikulik talked about, if someone, we're trying to hear the difference between bat, cat, hat. And so a few percent improvement can actually mean that people are picking up very high fidelity differences in sounds. Even in quiet. And so 5 to 10% difference can actually mean a lot when someone's communicating and their ease of being able to understand speech in daily life. But I'm happy if Tony wants to add to that.
Yeah, thanks. I agree completely with Dr. Runge. I saw a patient on Friday who I wish I could have recorded for this. He's a tractor and combine salesman, spends a lot of time on the phone, and he told me his exact words were, I just want an extra 5 or 10% word discrimination. I'm not greedy. That's all I want. And that really summarizes what we're talking about here. And so patients with hearing loss, they will notice just a few percentage points of difference. So it's absolutely clinically meaningful. And these are the hardest patients for us to deal with as clinicians because the hearing aids just make things louder. But what patients really want is to be able to tell words apart. And it's very frustrating for them and certainly for us not to have a treatment for that until now.
That's very helpful. Thanks for taking our questions.
As a reminder, to ask a question, please press star 11 on your telephone. Please stand by for our next question. Our next question comes from Jack Allen with Baird. Your line is now open.
Hi, thank you so much for taking the questions and putting on this great event. My first question is for the two physicians on the call. I was hoping that you could talk a little bit about the current market uptake of hearing aids. You mentioned some of the limitations as it relates to the cosmetic implications of these treatments. I'd love to hear about, what percentage of patients are receiving these devices and any early feedback you have as it relates to the recent legislation around OTC hearing aids and how it's driving deeper awareness of patients' hearing as well would be great.
Chris, you want to kick off?
Sure, happy to. Thank you. So as far as the percentage of people who are eligible to receive amplification or hearing aids because they have sufficient hearing loss, it's actually only about 20% of the population currently. And it goes along with what Dr. Mikulik talked about the expense, and Dr. Frank as well, that they're not covered by insurance and things as well. So there are very few people taking advantage of amplification, but for myriad reasons. the over-the-counter hearing aid, excuse me, that is designed. That's a major move forward to at least address the barriers of cost for hearing aids. So they're lower cost. They're still ear-level devices. There's still amplification, and so they're making sounds louder but not clearer. But what it's designed to do is at least get people the ability to have some amplification, maybe make it more accessible for people. But again, it doesn't get around the idea that you still have to wear things on your ears. And even if they're down to about a few $100s to get quality OTC hearing aids, but it still doesn't address a lot of the other issues. And even that isn't, if it's not covered by insurance, still can be a little bit much for some patients. But Dr. Mikulik, too, if you have extra thoughts.
Yeah, thank you. Excellent question. And so far, I think it's still early days with the over-the-counter hearing aids, and it's hard to see how that's going to shake out, what the dominant players are going to be. I think it will help us identify those patients who have word discrimination issues because they're going to buy something online and it's not going to work as well as they had hoped. And so then they're going to come see us in the clinic. So I think it's a positive development for what we're trying to do here in terms of regenerate hair cells and improve word discrimination. The other thing to remember about hearing aids is they're not like glasses. You get a pair of glasses and off you go, and you really don't need to ever go back to where you got your glasses. But hearing aids are finicky. They need to have their tubing changed. You really need a lifetime relationship. And by lifetime, I mean the lifetime of the hearing aid relationship with the person who sold you the hearing aid, and be able to go in and have it adjusted and fitted. And if your hearing changes, then the hearing aid needs to be retuned. So I don't know exactly how much of the market the over-the-counter is going to grab eventually. Like I said, it's going to be the wild, wild west for a little bit, and see how it shakes out over the next year or two.
Great. Thank you so much for that context. And then for the company, I was hoping that we could talk a little bit about how to contextualize the results from the 208 study, assuming that this hits the primary endpoint. You have a broad development that you, pursued with 322. Maybe you could take a minute and talk about the prior results, how they led up to the design of study 208, and how to think about the prior results in the context of the 208 readout. And any conversations you've had with regulators to this effect would be very helpful as well.
Yeah, Jack, a great question. I'll kick that off and then ask Kevin and Carl to comment. Listen, we've run 5 clinical studies, all of which have been critical in our sort of pioneering efforts to bring this drug forward. Really being able to understand, specifically where to fish, if you will, in terms of patients and where this works best has been a critical insight that we didn't have until this study. Really understanding, the details of how to manage the subjectivity of such a study has been critical. And that's why we believe that this is going to be, has the real potential to be a transformative study, for hearing therapeutics. But I think I'll turn it over to Kevin. Many of you know him as, many years at Harvard Medical School and Mass Eye and Ear Infirmary, and Carl LaBelle, who's been with the company for 5 years and a deep drug developer, starting his career really at Amgen. But Kevin?
Sure. Thanks, Jack. Yeah, we learned 3 things through these trials. First, that we have a favorable safety profile. Over 200 patients dosed with no serious adverse drug-related events. Second is we learned how to study them. Through different trial protocols, we learned advantages and disadvantages of each. And finally, we know who to study. We looked at different populations, saw some where we had repeated positive responses and others without responses. This allowed us to refine our study to the most highly concentrated group of responders. Carl?
Yeah, hey, Jack. I'll just add to what Kevin said that, what we're doing is blocking and tackling drug development here. You're really trying to refine the components that Kevin was describing. Endpoint. We think we've nailed that down. Alignment with FDA on what that endpoint is, speech perception, as we talked about earlier. Refining the patient population. We've narrowed that down to a couple of etiologies and a severity range. So this is exactly where we would want to be at this point, and we're just excited to see the results of this trial.
Great. Thank you so much for that context, and congratulations on a great event, and looking forward to the data next year.
Thanks, Jack.
Please stand by for our next question. Our next question comes from Jay Olson with Oppenheimer. Your line is now open.
Oh, hey, congrats on the progress, and thank you for hosting this event. We had a question on the screen failure rate in the 208 study. I think you said it was around 65%. Could you just talk about how that lines up with your expectations? And are there any other metrics that you believe suggest that the mitigation measures that you put in place for the 208 study were working?
Carl?
Yeah, hi, Jay. So the 65% that we cited is a little bit higher than what we'd seen in previous trials. And we think that's really a function of several of the design components that we incorporated. So firstly, you know that we've masked several protocol components. The sites don't know what the scores are that the patients need in order to get randomized to the trial. And in addition to that, we've got this lead-in period where patients have to come in, do repeat visits. We do the full battery of tests. And we're looking for good consistency of those results. And some patients failed to qualify for the study, but they were in the lead-in period. Right, so I think these are the most important factors that probably led to the increase in the failure rate that we saw for this trial. We're not surprised by any of the reasons that patients fail. As I talked about earlier, they fail primarily for the masked protocol components. The sites have done a great job on the study. We've been encouraging with them, and you can see from the numbers how well they've delivered with respect to recruitment. So as I said earlier, we just can't wait to see the results.
Great, thank you for that additional color. Maybe just one follow-up question. Any other feedback from investigators in the study or the patients on the study on some of the new measures that you've taken?
Carl?
Well, we talked to the sites, the investigators, the audiologists quite a bit. We're careful, and they are as well, to not share any specific information. We know it's a long day when the patients come in to do their testing. They spend about 90 minutes or so in the booth, and you know we put them through a battery of tests. They can be tired through those, and some of the things that Kevin has done working with some of the audiologists to encourage the audiologists to say, hey, it's okay to take a break for the patients if they're getting tired. But I think everyone has just been greatly appreciative of the effort that the whole team, company, and all the sites collectively have been doing to get this study over the finish line.
Great. Well, congrats again on the pioneering work that you're doing, and thank you for taking the questions.
Thanks, Jay.
Please stand by for our next question. Our next question comes from Danielle Gudalin with Chardan. Your line is now open.
Hey, good morning, everyone, and thank you for taking the question. In your presentation, you mentioned that in your trial, the breakdown of patients with sudden versus noise-induced hearing loss was about 70 to 30. How uniform is are the underlying reasons for the sudden hearing loss? And if they're not very uniform, do they have a potential to affect the efficacy readouts?
Yeah. Carl, do you want to take that? And then Kevin, you can comment?
Yeah, I'll just so quickly, right? About 70 to 30 was the split for patients that have permanent hearing loss, but due to a sudden idiopathic event. Those patients generally present as unilateral patients. Sometimes they'll have these events, though, at different times in their life, and so they may have hearing loss in both ears. The split on that number, as I said, is consistent with our previous trials. It's partly a reason because where we do our trials, we work primarily with private ENT practices, and if a patient loses their hearing all of a sudden, that's where they present, right? So it's sort of a function of that, not really representative of the total population. Kevin, do you want to add to that?
Sure. I'll add a little, but then I'd like to pass it to Dr. Mikulik. Sudden idiopathic hearing loss is defined by idiopathic, right? It's when we don't really understand what the cause is. We rule out all kinds of other things it could be, but are left with not knowing. And maybe Dr. Mikulek could comment on what it's like when patients present for this in the clinic.
So in terms of sudden idiopathic sensorineural hearing loss, one of the issues is it's often misdiagnosed. It's often diagnosed as fluid behind the eardrum, or these patients have been to a couple rounds of urgent care visits or earwax drops and so on. But once we actually figure out it's sudden sensorineural hearing loss, then the treatments are oral or intratympanic steroids, as we talked about, or even hyperbaric oxygen therapy. So unfortunately, these treatments aren't very efficacious. There's some data suggest that they may not be efficacious at all. And so this is really a sweet spot for regeneration, and particularly with word discrimination, because we can fix a drop in the pure tone average or the hearing level with hearing aids, but we can't fix the word discrimination. And usually patients with the sudden sensorineural hearing loss suffer a fair bit of decline in word discrimination along with that drop in hearing level.
Got it. Thank you. That was very helpful. And a quick follow-up. Based on the mechanism of 322, do you see a potential benefit in redosing? And in the context of the long-term follow-up data, what is your redosing strategy?
Chris, do you want to comment on that?
I'd be happy to. Part of the design of 322 is both to pursue regeneration, but also leave copies of progenitor cells behind. So we see there is a real opportunity for redosing. As David mentioned, we were very encouraged to see that single doses of 322 showed benefits out to 2 years. And in the future, we'll have opportunities to study the prolonged duration of the therapy.
Got it. Thank you very much for taking my questions.
Thank you.
Please stand by for our next question. Our next question comes from Kate Cruz with Goldman. Your line is now open.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. This is Kate on for Paul Choi. Understood that from a trial perspective, you were targeting a moderate to moderately severe patients as they had the highest responder rates, but in a real-world setting, would 322 be able to be used in the mild and severe patient populations as well, or is it also just moderate and moderately severe in the real-world setting as well? Thank you.
Yeah, very good question. I'll kick off and then ask Carl to comment on this. We think the best place, based off of all the previous studies, to really show the efficaciousness of our therapy is focused on this particular population, moderate to moderately severe and severe patients, and that's really the key to this. But the applicability of this, having something that's as safe as FX-322 is shown to be, I think really has the ability to affect people up and down the spectrum, from mild all the way up to patients who are about to get a cochlear implant. But Carl, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, just with respect to the criteria that we used for recruitment, the pure tone average range that we posted with the sites is 35 to 85 dB. So that's really from the high mild to about the low to mid severity or severe category. So it's a pretty broad range. What I shared during the talk was that the concentration of patients were mostly in that moderately severe range, but we really have covered the full boundaries of that range. So Kevin, do you want to add anything to that with respect to what that looks like for the population?
Sure. As we mentioned in the slides, it's a large group of people with moderate to moderate severe hearing loss. It's hard to imagine that those people would have a different biology than those with mild or severe hearing loss, but this is the group we've seen to be responsive in this particular speech perception test. As for who gets the drug in the future, a lot depends on how it's labeled, how it's reimbursed. I'd be curious, Dr. Runge's and Mikulek's impression of how they would suggest that the drug be used for patients if it were to gain those labels.
Yes, thank you. Actually, I'm very excited about this question because I thought, yes, I think it honestly could be for anyone. And I don't want to get too caught up on people's thresholds and their audiogram. People have a wide range of speech perception difficulties, especially with age. And so we're finding people, you can have something considered normal hearing, but to that person, they're still having some difficulty understanding speech and background noise and hearing what they would consider normally. But even though we consider it normal hearing, it's honestly just sort of a guideline we've given ourselves to bin the hearing loss in this way of mild, moderate, severe, and profound. I think also to my point about how exciting this is in the field of audiology and certainly otolaryngology is that we can now, if we can provide speech clarity with regenerative therapy, then that means we can combine things. So someone with mild hearing loss could really take advantage of this if they find that they're really struggling with speech perception, they need clarity, and that's all they need. Then people with more mild threshold loss could actually benefit from this. But even if we get into the more severe to profound and we combine them with some of the other therapies that we do have, for example, combined with hearing aids, so maybe they have speech clarity, but they still need a little bit of boost and amplification, we can make these combinations again to best serve our patients depending on what their needs are. And so I could see this therapy being widely applicable across a large population of hearing loss patients.
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Runge. The risk benefit here, the risks are so small that I think a lot of people who have trouble with word discrimination and hearing are going to want to give it a try. And so I would, irrespective of how it's labeled, I would see a fair bit of off-label usage across the whole spectrum of hearing loss. Because again, the biggest risk here is a hole in the eardrum, and the odds of that are extremely low. And these procedures are very easy to do in the clinic. They don't hurt. People can walk in, walk out. You can drive yourself. So it's not a big deal. So the downside risk is extraordinarily low with this procedure, and there's a lot of familiarity with ENT. So I would see a fairly broad adoption range here.
Yeah, great question. Any follow-up?
Good on my end. Thank you so much for taking our question.
Thank you.
Please stand by for our last question. Our last question comes from Jack Allen with Baird. Your line is now open.
Hi, thank you again for taking the follow-ups here and the great event. I wanted to just touch on the MS program as well, as I was mentioned a number of times throughout the call. I know that the hearing is a little more proximal, but as you move into the second half of 2023, I was wondering if you have any further thoughts as it relates to the design of a first-in-human study of the MS portfolio, and whether you'd look to go into MS patients or healthy volunteers first, and how quickly you could reach an effective dose with MS.
Yeah, I'll provide a little background and ask Chris Luce to comment on that. Frequency is very, very focused on what we're doing with FX-322 and 345. And however, within that, over the last 2 years, we've seen the power of progenitor cell activation and being able to target the oligodendrocytes, in the brain with some specific expertise that we've developed. And so there's a core team of folks working on this over that time period, generating the preclinical data and providing the medical insights that we need. And I applaud Chris and that team for the progress that we've made. Maybe, Chris, with that, you want to provide a little bit more detail.
Yes, we're very encouraged by the striking preclinical data we've produced head-to-head and do look forward to moving this to MS patients. And I think we can really go to school on the many remyelination therapy trials that have been done that have shown a modest signal in humans. And we can learn a lot from the design, specifically where MS patients had visual deficits that were addressed. And as we move through our IND-enabling studies and discussions with regulators, we'll be able to share more about what that specific path looks like.
And just one more point. I think when we talk about hearing, it's such pioneering work, but the power of what we're doing in MS is there are models that people have been able to look at and understand in the space and look at our progenitor cell activation data against that. And that's been very powerful to build out the credibility and the validity of what we're doing. As we not just see ourselves as a hearing company, though that's clearly where we're focused, and see tremendous shareholder value being created there, but also with our second program in MS. So, thank you for that question, Jack.
Great. Thanks so much for the call.
Thank you. Okay.
This concludes today's conference call. Thank you for participating. You may now disconnect.
Thank you.